have not made a video in a while, and that is because I have just been super busy and had a lot of stuff going on. So one of those things that I have going on, I thought I would make a video about. And this is kind of crazy, I guess, but if you watched my About Me video, you know that I majored in astrophysics when I was in college, which was kind of a long time ago at this point. And I really, really miss it, and I've been thinking more and more seriously about going back to grad school and getting my PhD. I know there's a lot of arguments against it, and I've heard most of them and weighed them, and I still think that's the direction I want to go in, but even if I ultimately decide not to, there's still a lot of steps you have to take to even be in a position to decide. So applications to start in the fall of 2017 are generally due about December of 2016. And along with those applications, you have to take not only the general GRE, but the subject physics GRE. And those are offered only at set times of year. So there was one yesterday, and then there's one coming up in October. So basically, I had to take one of those exams if I even wanted to be able to apply this year at all. I took the exam yesterday, so I decided this back in about July. So I had about 2 months of time to prepare myself for the physics GRE. So it was a lot of fun. I'm really glad it's over. I don't think I did spectacularly, but I think I did okay enough to move on with my applications if I decided to do so. So I thought I would just make a quick video talking about the physics GRE and how I prepared for it and what it's all about. So just a couple general things in case, like me, you didn't really know that much about the physics GRE. One, all the subject GREs are done on paper. So when I started studying, I kind of thought, yeah, the old ones used to be done on paper, but now they just do it on a computer because it's just a multiple choice test. But no, they are all still done on paper. So you should plan for that in your thing. And you cannot have a calculator of any sort. I kind of vaguely knew this intellectually, I guess, but I was still using my calculator for most of my prep work until about 2 weeks before the exam, and I was like, oh shit, I need to wean myself off of this, because I'm not very fast with mental math all the time, and so that was a big change for me. And just the general form of the test, it's 100 questions, and you have 170 minutes, 2 hours and 50 minutes, and that is not a lot of time. So you have less than 2 minutes per question, and that is a big issue that people have with the test. It's a big issue that I had with the test. I actually kind of ran out of time yesterday. I had about 5 minutes for the last 10 questions, and that was not great. There's also a guessing penalty on the subject GRE, so for every one you get wrong, you lose 1/4 of a point off your raw score. And there's 5 options for each question. So basically, if you don't know anything about the answer, you shouldn't guess because it will probably decrease your score over time. But if you are able to eliminate even just 1 or 2 of the answers, then you should guess because you actually have statistically a better chance of getting to your score over the course of the test. And so don't be afraid to guess, just don't guess blindly, make educated guesses. Yeah. Oh, and you can't use mechanical pencils, so make sure you have number 2 sharpened non-mechanical pencils and a good eraser. And I forgot to get non-mechanical pencils until the night before the test, so I had to make a target run at 8 o'clock on Friday night, and I was like, ah, shit. They did end up having a couple extra at the testing center, but I was glad I had mine and was ready to go. So that's a little bit of an overview about the subject GRE. So I'm just going to talk about how I went from 2 months ago not remembering what an eigenvalue was to being able to hopefully get a decent score on the GRE. So because I am kind of a nerd and I did enjoy my physics major so much, I kept some of my textbooks. That is where I started, right back at the very fucking beginning. Tipler and Mosca, Volume 1. I don't know if this is a common book for other schools to use, but this was our introductory physics textbook my sophomore year when I started taking major classes. So Volume 1 covers mechanics, oscillations and waves, and thermodynamics. And I also have Volume 2 of Tipler and Mosca, which covers electricity and magnetism, light, and modern physics. So I started with these babies, and I just started reading them and trying to get back in that mindset of doing physics. I had my notebook, just a plain notebook, and I started taking notes. I worked through some of the sample problems in the text, and that's what's in pencil, and then the actual notes I was taking were in pen. And then after I took the notes, I made note cards. So I would go back through and write down all the stuff I needed to memorize and put them in these little packets, and they're organized by subject. So I find for me that writing things down is very key to helping me remember them. So by taking the notes and then making the note cards, that was writing it down twice, and then going through the note cards is a good way to remember it. And sometimes even when I was going through the note cards, I would just take a piece of scratch paper and a pencil, and instead of just thinking, you know, the answers to what's on the other side of the note card, I would actually write it out. And so then, one, you can't like trick yourself like, oh yeah, I was close enough, because you wrote down what you thought it was, and if it's not the same, then you were wrong, and you have to do that card, put it back in the to be studied pile. And then just the actual act of writing it out helps me remember. And I think there have been studies and stuff that that's a proven technique to help things get into your memory. So I was going through these, and it was a little overwhelming because I had forgotten so much, and it was so basic, and it wasn't necessarily going to be everything I needed to know. So I was looking around online for more resources, and someone on Reddit recommended to me the book Conquering the Physics GRE. This is by Yoni Khan and Adam Anderson, who are, I think one is a PhD student. Yeah, they're both PhD students who have obviously taken the physics GRE. So this book is specific to the physics GRE itself. So it's not necessarily going to be in depth. I wouldn't rely on this for anything besides the physics GRE, but for the physics GRE, it's a very good summary of pretty much every topic, and in a form that you'll need to know on the GRE, and there's a lot of practice questions. So I started going through that, each section on that, and going through all of the practice problems, which I did just in the back of my notebook. Lots of practice questions. And that was very, very helpful. I really recommend this book, especially if you are like me and you've been away from physics for, God, 8 years almost. I'm so old. So yeah, this was a great resource, and then I just made note cards from this and took notes from this. So I was still using the same process just with this book, and then I went back to my textbooks if I needed more information, because he doesn't get very in-depth in this book. And one textbook that I was really glad I had was my non-classical physics textbook by Randy Harris, and I was able to go back and look at especially some of the quantum mechanics stuff, because I found that I did not remember anything about quantum mechanics, and the stuff that they were saying in here, they kind of took for granted that you would have a passing understanding of what it was, and I really didn't. I was like, I don't remember shit. So this was really good. I didn't take notes from this. I would just read through the sections and help me get that background understanding, so that when I went back to this book, I was able to actually follow the arguments that they were making and the derivations that they were doing. Through the course of those 3 textbooks and my Conquering Physics GRE, I ended up with quite a few note cards. So like I said, this is broken down by subject. So this is miscellaneous topics. So this was some of the specialized topic stuff, and then random things that I came across after I had made all my other note cards that I was like, oh crap, I don't know that, and I would just add it to these. So this was kind of my catch-all at the end. It was electromagnetism. Good old classical mechanics. Quantum mechanics. And in the Conquering the Physics GRE, they combine quantum mechanics and atomic physics together, so this is both of those. Special relativity. Optics and waves. Thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. And laboratory techniques, which also included photon-matter interaction for some reason. So just as a sample of what one of my note cards look like, let me grab the top one off of this, which is optics and waves. So this is just Bragg diffraction. And then on the back I wrote the formula that applies, which is that the maxima are at d sine theta equals n lambda over 2. And just a brief little description of how the Bragg diffraction is applied, because I didn't necessarily know that off the top of my head. But if it was just like a formula I needed to remember and it didn't need necessarily the background on it, then it would just be magnification equals negative s prime over s. So yeah, so I would go just through these note cards. I tried to go through like one set a day once I had made them all. I didn't always get to it, but they were good. I would throw a pack in my purse when I was out, and if I was walking around, I could just start flipping through them, and that was super helpful because one of the things with physics GRE is you really do have to memorize a lot of formulas because you don't have time to rederive them, and you need to know them, and they won't be given to you. The information sheet that they give you on the physics GRE is pretty useless. I think about the only useful thing that was on it was HC, the value of HC, which they give you in electrovolts nanometers, which is actually useful. But I think that was the only thing I ended up using off of the givens. Oh, and before I started this whole process, I made myself a study schedule. So basically this starts on July 12th and it goes until September 17th, which was yesterday, the test. And it was just which section I was planning on studying, and then when I was going to do all the practice tests, and then just a general list of topics as provided by the ETS website. I didn't necessarily strictly follow that schedule, but it gave me a good idea of whether or not I was on track and if I needed to spend more time studying. And then one of the most helpful things that I did, so obviously you have to learn all this material, but the physics GRE isn't necessarily testing how well you know your physics material, it's testing how well you can do the physics GRE, really. So if you've taken standardized tests in the past, which you have if you're considering going to grad school, then you know how that works. It's somewhat of a game, almost. So actually taking the practice tests is hugely important. So I took 3 practice tests. So the ETS website will provide the most recent practice test, which is the 2008 practice test. And you can find the other ones, the earlier ones, in other places online, and I'll put some links below in case you're interested. So like I said, the most recent test that you can get is the 2008 test from the ETS website. And I wanted to leave that one for last because I figured it would be the most representative of what the actual test would be like since it's the most recent. So I started, before I did any studying at all, before I even wrote out my study schedule, I took a practice test just to see where I was at. And as you could have guessed, it was not pretty. I took the 2001 test for this purpose. And I left a lot of them blank. So this is my answer sheet. A lot of red on there. So I left 43 of them blank, and I got 18 right, and I got 39 wrong, which is really impressive because it shows that I thought I knew what the fuck I was doing, and I absolutely did not. So this corresponded to a raw score of 8, which scaled to a 450, which is about the 5th percentile for that test. So that was a little humiliating and humbling, but I knew that I wasn't going to do well, and I just wanted to see where I was at as a starting point. So then what I did is I got scratch paper and I went back, and every question that I had gotten wrong, I reworked or left blank. I reworked without looking at the answers just to see what I would come up with, and I was able to kind of make a fair effort at that. So what I did was I did that after I'd studied. So after I studied the classical mechanics section, I went back and went through all the classical mechanics questions on this test to make sure I could do that. And I did that again after I was done with E&M, and again after I was done with the other ones. So that was an eye-opener, but it's good. I would recommend that you take one at least very early on in your studying to help kind of guide you and give you an idea of what you should be studying for and what your end goal is going to have to be. The one thing about this was because I left so many of them blank and because I had so little clue what I was doing, I finished very quickly and I had no time problems. So pretty much the whole first month and a half of my studying, I wasn't really worried about time because I was like, oh, I had plenty of time. But then once I had studied more of the areas and I could actually make an honest attempt at a test to kind of see where I was at, I took the 1996 exam. So all the physics exams are 77, so 96-77 is the physics GRE from 1996. And I did a little better this time. This is my answer sheet from this one. Still a lot of red. I got 20 correct and only 22 incorrect, but I left 57 blank because I completely ran out of time. I only made it through question, I want to say 63 of 100 before my 2 hours and 50 minutes were up. And I was totally shocked. I did not realize that I was going to be hurting that much for time. I didn't follow how much time was passing. I mean, I tried to keep track as I was doing it, but I just got really bogged down in working through like one problem, and I would spend way too long on it. So that corresponded to a raw score of 14.5, which scaled to a 550, which is the 26th percentile. So, you know, still not great, but I was absolutely learning things, and that was good. So this was a nice check-in to see where I was at. And then once I went through and I did questions 64 through 100 without any time, and I just worked through them to see how many I could get, once I added those in, it would have corresponded to 34 correct, 34 blank, and 32 incorrect, which was a RAS score of 26, which would have been a 650, which is somewhere in the upper 40s percentile, and it would have been a lot better score. So that was a real sharp wake-up call that I needed to start focusing on time. And this was the test. The green check marks are ones that I went back and had to redo. And I did the same thing. I just reworked all the problems on scratch paper. And the reason I did it on scratch paper is so that I wasn't looking at what the right answer was, because I marked the right answers on here when I graded it, so that I could actually just work through the problem and see if I got to the right answer without knowing it in advance. I didn't bother taking I think it's like it's from like the 1980s or something, the other practice test that's online, and I didn't think it was very useful. There was a pretty big difference even between the 01 and the 96, and I just didn't think it was worth the time to go back to these older ones, especially because at this point I was only a couple weeks away from the test. So then I just focused on my studying, and then 1 week before the test, so last weekend, I took the 2008 practice exam. And this one went a lot better, although I still ran into time problems. Although at least I was able to look at all of the questions at least once. When I did the 96 exam, I literally, like I said, I got to question 63 and I was like, time's up, and I hadn't even looked at question 64 through 100. On this one, I was more conscious of the timing issue and was able to work through it, but I had to skip a lot of questions that I could have solved. I just didn't have time to really work through them. But I at least looked at all the questions once. So this one went a little bit better, as you can maybe see by the somewhat lack of red. I got 47 correct, and I left 34 blank, and I got 19 incorrect. So that's a raw score of 42.25, which scales to 670, which is the 48th percentile. So I was kind of happy with that. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think I've scored in pretty much the 98th or 99th percentile in any standardized test I've ever taken. So it may be an okay score, but it's not one that I was personally happy with. But given what I was working with and the timeline in which I was doing it, it wasn't so bad. And so then in the last week before the test, I worked through these questions that I had missed or left blank. And I studied my note cards really hard to make sure that I had all of those stupid formulas in my brain. I just read through some of the chapters, just kind of review, and I found some notes online, which I'll link below, which I just kind of read through. I would read through them like every night, and it would like put me to sleep. I would just like fall asleep reading physics, and I would dream of physics and dream about the test. So the actual test day was yesterday, and like I said, I still had time issues, but I did at least look at all of the questions. I didn't get the time to really go into and try and answer some of them that I would have liked to. I counted at the end and I left 21 blank. So I kind of went through and did some mental math, and if I answered somewhat similarly to how I did on the 08 test, as far as percentages incorrect and correct, then I think that'll translate out to about a 730, which, you know, like I said, it's not the highest score, and it's a little disappointing for me personally. But the only purpose of this test is to help me get into grad school, and there are far more important things. So I'm going to try and focus on the rest of my application, and hopefully the application committees will look at me as a very well-rounded candidate, especially since I am so old. Which leads me to my last point, which is, now that the test is over, I'm still about a year out from even starting school if I were to apply and get accepted and decide to go. So I don't want to lose all of this knowledge that I've been working so hard to gain, and I in fact want to deepen it. So I think one of the things I'm going to do is, as I'm continuing to self-study physics, is I want to make videos and share some of the stuff that I'm learning or relearning with you guys, and so I think I'm going to do that. I won't make any promises about how frequently it's going to be, because obviously I'm not always great about getting into the camera. But I am so excited. This textbook, we called this Bob, the Big Orange Book, and it is Introduction to Modern Astrophysics. So this is my astrophysics textbook for a few different classes. And I didn't even crack this open while I was studying for the physics GRE because there's only a little bit of stuff that could be relevant to astrophysics on there, and it just wasn't worth the time as relevant to getting a better score. But now that that is over, I'm super excited to actually get into the astrophysics part, which is my favorite part, obviously, because that's what I'm considering studying. And I'm super excited about it. Me and Bob are going to be good friends over the next year. And I've listened to some physics and astronomy podcasts, and I'm a member of the Planetary Society, and I'm going to try and just stay involved in all that stuff so that I can hopefully transition into this field, even though it's a little bit of a non-traditional path. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little video about how I prepped for the GRE as a returning student, someone who has been away from school and physics for a while. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you like my videos, then please feel free to subscribe to my channel or follow me on Twitter or anything like that. Alright, thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. Bye, lovelies.